Let's begin this tutorial by understanding what modularity is. Modularity is using modules or small parts of code to simplify a program. In LabVIEW, modules of code are called SubVIs. SubVIs are similar to a subroutine in text-based programming. Why use modularity? Using modularity makes your program more efficient, makes it easier to understand the flow of data, it simplifies the code, and the modules are reusable. Let's take an example. Here is some code that has two sections that are identical. If we replace each section of code with a SubVI, we'll simplify our code and make it easier to understand what's going on. Here you can see we've replaced those sections of code with a SubVI. The block diagram seems less cluttered and we can understand what is happening. Now let's look at how to implement this in LabVIEW. Go ahead and open LabVIEW and start with a blank VI. Now we'll go ahead and place some numeric controls on the front panel and a numeric indicator. We'll be creating a basic program that does some simple math. Place 4 numeric controls on the front panel and 1 numeric indicator. Now, in the block diagram, we'll place some math functions. Place an addition function, a subtraction function, and a multiplication function. Wire 2 of the numeric controls to the addition function, 2 of the numeric controls to the subtraction function, and the outputs from both of those functions into the multiplication function. Wire the output from the multiplication function into the numeric indicator. You'll see we can execute this code by putting numbers in the numeric controls on the front panel and running the VI. The result is provided in the numeric indicator. Now let's go to the block diagram and change this code into a SubVI. Highlight the code that you would like to create a SubVI from by clicking in the upper left corner and dragging to the lower right corner. Then go to the Edit menu and select Create SubVI. You'll notice that an icon has replaced all the code in between the controls and the indicator. Now let's go ahead and open this SubVI and look at what's inside. You'll see that the front panel has all the controls that are going into the SubVI and the indicators that are coming out of it. And if you look at the block diagram for the SubVI, it's very similar to what we had created. Now let's save this SubVI. From the File menu, select Save. Find a directory and type a name in under File Name and click OK. Now let's look at how to change the icon for the SubVI that we've created. Right-click the icon in the upper right corner of the front panel or the block diagram and select Edit Icon. You'll see a pop-up that has tools for customizing the icon on the left side. If we double-click the shaded rectangle, it'll draw a rectangle across the whole icon, effectively clearing it. Now let's customize our icon. It helps to customize your icon with a picture that depicts what the actual SubVI does. Now that I've drawn my icon, I want to save it for all the different colors that could possibly be displayed. I'll do this by selecting the other color palettes, like 16 color, and then selecting the Copy From 256 color button. You can select Show Terminal, and it'll show you the terminals if you wanted to incorporate them into the image. Select OK, and we'll return to the front panel. Now you have customized your icon. Now let's take a look at customizing the connections to this SubVI. Right-click on the icon in the upper right corner and select Show Connector. You'll see that there's a pattern for the connections to the SubVI. And they're all orange because all of our controls and indicators are double numerics. Right-click this and go down to Disconnect All Terminals. This will remove a connection from the terminals and the controls and indicators on the front panel. You can also right-click on the connection and go down to Patterns and select different patterns if you wanted to wire the SubVI differently. For this example, we'll stick with the standard 4 connections on the left, 1 connection on the right, to correspond to our 4 controls and 1 indicator. Now select one of the terminals on the connector panel, followed by selecting the connector that you'd like to correspond to that terminal. Repeat this for all the connectors and indicators on the front panel. Now let's set up the properties for each terminal. There are 3 properties: required, recommended, and optional. If you right-click on the terminal from the terminal panel, you can go all the way down to This Connection Is and select required, recommended, or optional. If a connection is required, the calling VI will not run if that terminal is not wired. For recommended and optional, the terminals do not have to be wired for the VI to run. For output terminals, you can only specify the connections to be recommended or optional. Now let's save and close this sub-VI and go back to the main VI. On our main VI, we can place another instance of the sub-VI by right-clicking and going to the Functions palette and selecting Select a VI. You'll get a Browse pop-up that will allow you to browse to the sub-VI and select it. Once you have selected the VI, you can place it like any other function from the Function palette. Let's wire up the controls to a second instance of our sub-VI, but in a different order. Let's create a numeric indicator for the output of our second instance of the sub-VI. Now you can see how it's easy to reuse sub-VIs and how using sub-VIs has cleaned up our code.